Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hey everyone. Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. I happen to be speaking with Ben Mackey today. Ben, how you going?
I'm going well, thanks, Saul. As we were just saying a moment ago, I'm down here on the lovely Central Coast and just keeping cool.
Just where on the Central Coast are you?
Around Terrigal Way, Erina Way, if people know it.
Right, yeah. That's always. So you've already ahead of me. I always generally ask people. I go, so where are you in the world? Because a lot of people are overseas, and so actually probably not the minority of people in Australia, but there's probably been more people, at least recently, been overseas. And I always find it interesting. It's like, oh, whereabouts are you? What the time? It never gets old for me. I'm always like, oh, what's the time over there? What's the weather like? I always really like finding that out. But actually, I guess it's one of those ever-present things. People are always like, oh, what's the weather like? It's everybody asks it. It's a point of interest, and it's also, I guess, it's an easy way to start a conversation too, I suppose.
It is, yeah, it is an easy way to start the conversation. But for me, for a long time now, I've always sort of categorized the year, any given year, into sort of 4 sections just based on the seasons. And
yeah,
I don't know if it's just a thing when you get a little bit older or if it's just the way that I view the world, but you just start to notice, like, I'll go out for a walk and then I'll start to notice when the leaves on some of the trees start to change. I'm like, yeah, right, coming into autumn. Or you go all through the winter and then finally you start to see the green sprouts coming out in the tree. And then there's that special moment where you get that first feeling of heat in the air. And it's like, finally, and yeah, as I was saying to you earlier, it's been kind of weird this year. It felt like spring took a long time to get going. You had all these sort of rainy days and it was quite cool. And I had the doonas on the bed for a long time. So
yeah,
the fact that it's finally actually hot, like I've got the fan on and I can hear the cicadas outside my window buzzing away as we speak. It's here finally. I'm all for it.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like noticing those little things, I think it probably just means, especially with what you were saying, that you're probably a sort of a detail orientated person in a range of different areas, which, flows very strongly into what you do. And you write. So for people, I'll let you explain in a little bit more detail, but Ben's a copywriter. And so if you wouldn't mind, just give everyone just a bit of a, I guess, short history lesson about how you kind of came to be doing this now. Like what was the sort of short story, like the path to led you to this point in 2024?
Okay. So yeah, look, in a business sense, I'd always enjoyed writing from when I was a kid. That in itself is a story. But to answer your question specifically here, I've had this business for 12 years now. Yep. Got Scribe Copywriting operating in late 2012. And that came about because I'd had different people suggest to me that copywriting was something I should look into. Now, like a lot of people at that point in time, so I was back in my 20s then, I just thought that copywriting had something to do with like writing legal documents. That's how I imagined it. And it just sounded kind of dry and boring. But I was like, okay, well, I'll just look it up. And so I'm just looking at the details of what copywriting involves. And I'm like, well, I'm already sort of, I write as a hobby already. And like people ask me to write different things. And it might be some friend who has a profile on like a dating site and they want me to go over it for them or that sort of stuff. So I've already got the grips of what it involves, the actual writing part of it. But then there's plenty of flexibility there. Like you can work from home or you can work pretty much anywhere. And there's a lot of scope to take it as far as I want to take it. And the funny thing is that at that time, I was actually looking to get into film and TV. I studied at QCA. I did a Bachelor of Animation degree because I was really into cartooning as well as a kid. That was the other thing I loved to do when I was growing up, was drawing and writing. I was one of those, I guess you could say I was like a writer, illustrator at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. But then, yeah, so I started Scribe back then just as sort of a side gig while I was looking to get different gigs in film and TV. And then somewhere along the way, that's turned into what it is now. And I focus on the business and, take all different kinds of clients. Like I've worked with everybody from, say, accountants to landscapers to people who build racing cars, which that was a really interesting client to work with there. So you work with all sorts and through business networking as well, which, I've been involved with a number of different groups over the last decade and a bit, is that you do meet all sorts, you work with all sorts, and it's quite fascinating. It's just fascinating the fact that with every different business that you work with, even if many years later or even months later, you might work with somebody who's doing the exact same thing as the last person, is that everybody has their individual stories. Everybody has the little things that they do especially well, and they've got that story to tell. And that's why one of the phrases a lot when I talk about what I do, what I specialize in for clients is about telling stories that sell. Like if you focus on those three words, stories that sell, that's the key to putting out the content that's actually going to help promote your business better, and it's get you in touch with more of the people that you might need in order to hit that next level in your business.
Yeah, and it actually sounds very much like a lot of the things that I really like about what we do too, like similar reasons. And I'd probably hazard to guess that that's the case for like a lot of other people too, who even aren't in like our, broad sort of industry, like creative industries, like where the creative industries meets marketing meets, other things, because there's a lot of similarities into what I like about what we do too. And a lot of it, like to simplify it down, like you were saying, is actually the stories that you come across with other people. And I still fall into this trap too. I don't know whether you do this, but I still kind of fall into this trap occasionally of, even though there's like so much experience where you go, oh, it's a certain sort of industry, you generally know what to expect. And then when you actually find somebody's story out, it's still surprisingly many, many times is actually like there's some really interesting, completely different aspect about it that makes it almost brand new to you again, like when you actually uncover it. Or like, and I find myself, just assuming it's going to be X, and then it ends up being Y. And that's, I've often thought about that with myself, and I've gone, oh, that means it's kind of comforting in a weird way. It's like, it means that I'm like a lot of other people in like heaps of ways where you assume things without thinking, and then it's a nice surprise, and you go, oh, that's, everyone is actually incredibly unique. And so therefore there's like all this, I guess, untapped, until you actually talking to your client or whoever you're, helping them with their story, there's this untapped sort of potential lying there, is that, so, I guess like that's probably a good sort of segue in a way to some of the stuff that you do, where outside of you just writing for people, of helping people to write themselves too. And so can you, because that's not something that I see a lot of copywriters necessarily doing. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because I find that quite interesting, actually.
Sure. So just to be specific, you mean how I help people to write their own content and to do that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I have held workshops in the past where I show people how to write their own blog articles. Now, when I started doing this was before ChatGPT, that sort of stuff. And we might talk about that in a little bit. But what also came about is that I was having these conversations with clients or with potential clients, and I realized that what they were looking for wasn't specifically a service that I could itemize and then invoice them for. It was more, they just wanted to talk back and forth like about the stuff that they were doing. And the thing is, a lot of people actually can write their own content, Saul.
Mm.
Like they can put the content out there. It's just either they don't have the time to do it, or they don't have the ability to do it yet. And I stress the word yet there. It just takes a little bit of time. They just got to start for lack of a better word, there are patterns and there are systems that you have in place that helps you to put everything together. So through that, I created a whole new range of services, which are they're my copy consultation services. And that's where I'll sit down with a client, depending on whether they just want a one-off session or they want my ongoing support or whether they want to put aside a day with me. And we'll just talk about what they're doing with their marketing. Like, what are you doing like with your website, and what social media sites do you have a presence on? Are you doing video? Everything. And that's really just, it's almost like a choose your own adventure a bit, Saul. It's really just to give them an open canvas to say, oh, well, I'm thinking of doing this, and could I do this? And then I'm relying on my experience, the more than 12 years experience that I have now working with all these different businesses, to say, well, why don't we try this? Or why don't we, or what if you work on that? Now, the way I see it is that if they're able to create their own content and want to do that, great. Off they go. They've got a system there so they can put out all the content they need for their business. Excellent. And then there's a personal side of that as well, which we can get into as well. And that's more to do with personal development and growth, and through journaling and that sort of thing. But that's separate from the actual business, the nuts and bolts of your business. So they're either going to go away and they're going to be able to do that for themselves. But if they don't, if they decide, oh, you know what, this is just, maybe they feel like they just don't grasp it. Like a lot of people sort of don't realize that they've got raw talent there. Sadly, they don't sort of identify that. Or they just like, yeah, look, I understand what we're talking about. I understand how to do it. But look, I'm just juggling too much other stuff. I don't have the time for all this. Well, then they can get somebody like me or somebody else who specializes in copy. They can get somebody else on board to manage it for them. So to use the old cliche, it's really a win-win situation, whatever they end up going with. But it's just to get people to, instead of knowing what to think, it's train them in how to think, and then converting that into the words that they're putting out there.
Yeah, because I guess like either way, like you said, it's win-win, because either way, and I mean, once again, it's surprisingly similar to everything that we do too, is that it's win-win, being that they either don't realize they have the potential, they do it, and then they uncover something, or then they end up having a much better understanding of what they actually need through having to do it themselves. It's like anything, hey, like you look at somebody doing a particular activity and you go, oh, that would be, this easy, hard, whatever, or you have a perception until you do it. And then you go, actually, it's really difficult. And then you go, actually, it's too hard. I don't want to do it. Like you said, too busy. I'll get Ben to help me out with it. Or then somewhere in between where they want to do it. And then for you and for them and for everybody involved, like it's extremely helpful, because then they also have a better understanding of what's involved. Like even if you end up actually doing it, because I mean, odds are they're going to be, depending on the sort of person they are, to have a completely different perspective on what you do. And, from like a selfish, viewpoint as like, a provider, someone providing any service, it's probably for the most part, beneficial for the client to have a better understanding of what's involved, but there's a lot of shades of grey there too. But I find it particularly interesting too that with that approach, then from what you were talking about, and you've got this, you sort of outline it on your website a little bit too, with that the journaling part of it too, because years ago we made there was a client that we had, and we made this particular app at the time, which was for iPad, which was a specific journaling app, and she had her own sort of process to do it. And I myself personally haven't done a lot of that sort of stuff, but I found and still I'm continue to find that idea a really interesting one. So if I just want to like expand a little bit, say on, I guess like some of the advantages, for people that you've seen where, especially in the scenario where they've come and they've been getting either, copy by you or they've been doing it and they've had your help. And then you've gone down this sort of journaling, path as well. And what you've seen, like any particular, transformation or realizations, I guess, that people have through that process. I find that like a really interesting, aspect.
Sure. Look, I understand the question that you're asking, Saul. What I'd like to do is I'd like to split this answer into two different parts. Now,
Sure.
First of all, there's how I've seen people's writing improve as a result of me saying, oh, look, you should definitely write more, that sort of stuff. So the first question, I think of different people and I'll see them, maybe they'll post an update about something on Facebook and I'll be reading this and I'll go, wow, that's really well written. And, sometimes it's actually been a friend and I'll reach out to them and say, oh, look, you did really well with that. And we'll chat back and forth. And just through the conversations that we have, because I like to think that if I see somebody who has a talent, it might not be writing necessarily, Saul. It might be something else that I kind of will go, you should really have a look at this. Like you should do that more and more. I could really see. That's the kind of thing that gets me juiced, actually, just seeing people really do well at something and knowing that you played some small part in.
Yeah, that's nice.
Pushing them along that. Yeah, it's a buzz. I think it's a buzz.
It is.
And then you get the people that don't want to see you succeed because they've got their own insecurities. But, the less that we talk about those people, the better, because they're just vampires. So don't worry about the vampires.
Yeah, don't talk about them.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to think I'm the opposite. I encourage people along. So I'll see people, I'll say, oh, look, you should write more, that sort of stuff. And then they'll send me they'll be like, oh, Ben, I just wrote this, and they'll send it to me and you can just see over time how it gets better. And when I see the way that other people write, it's just funny, like the way that other people structure sentences sometimes, or the way that they describe a particular scene makes even somebody like myself, and I've been doing this for many years, I'll just sit there and go, man, I would never have said this like that. I would never have put this particular tone on that. But there's just, sometimes it's difficult even for me to put words to it, the feeling that you get from the way that somebody writes about whatever it is, memory, a scene, all that sort of stuff. So that's probably the best way I can answer the first part of that question, Saul, is that the results that I see from encouraging other people to start writing, to start journaling more, is that it improves their writing skills. And for the people who are listening to that, just let that sink in for a moment, that if you are journaling, and it doesn't really matter about what it is, it could be about your day, it could be about a revelation that you've had regarding something or other, anything. If you're doing that consistently, then that automatically translates, or I should say automatically manifests in the ability to actually write your own copy and to do it better and to write for your business. It's not just about writing about your personal story. That transforms into writing about anything.
It's a skill. It's a skill. That's sort of transferal then, isn't it? Like it's just the practice of actually, because it's easy, I guess, and true also at the same time to get tangled up in that it's because of something else. But I think a lot of these things too, I mean, it's a mix, but it's just that practice makes perfect. It's that you're getting better. It's like sport. Sport's always like the great example, but like, for example, I haven't drawn for a while because I used to do, and my wife and I, we studied illustration at QCA as well.
Yeah, okay.
Sort of years ago when that was like a course there. And so we were, and have always been like, artist type people, drawing and painting and doing all that sort of stuff, but have this equal love and interest in things that are digital and sort of how things are made. And I haven't drawn for a while, right? Like I haven't, like I sort of do it, but I haven't been doing it, and I've wanted to return to it, do it more. And, in a funny lot of roundabout way, I got a new phone recently, the S24, and it's got the pen inside, the S Pen, and it's got this, and I was just like mucking around with it, and I'm so sort of embroiled in like the digital world and digital tools, and the S Pen has this pretty good app in it. There's pretty good drawing app. That's actually, and I was like, oh, I'll give this a go, and I started drawing, and to find myself just hand-eye, really practical, not like inspirational, from that point of view, just found myself like, oh, just sketching and drawing. Just the physical side of it at the start, it was a bit like, oh, I feel pretty rusty, in this, just like the physical side. But the tool, as I was doing it then for like more than an hour, I know I drew some random silly illustration, half cat, half man sort of dude. And I was just playing around with the tools and got better. Like even in that time, I was like, and in that little microcosm of rediscovering something, I had this sort of accelerated sort of improvement. I was going, and that realized, and that I think that point, which translates obviously very strongly to writing too, of when you have like the power of seeing your own improvement is a really powerful one, because it makes you happy. It makes you, and that sort of often then translates to confidence, which translates to doing more of it, which translates to, and that sort of, and the cycle goes on. Hey.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a powerful thing, but like, and so with, do you do your own, sort of journaling?
I do. Look, I'll give you a treat here and I'll take you back to the start, because I really think that it's only through taking you back to the start and taking everybody who listens to this back to the start that they'll understand the process of going from where I was to where I am now, in my humble opinion, when it comes to writing and stuff. So
take us back, Ben. Take us back.
Yeah. Okay. So funnily enough, I think I was first inspired to keep a regular journal when I was at a mate's place, and I borrowed his copy of The Heroin Diaries, which is written by Nicky Sixx from Motley Crue, and it basically details his life back in like 1986, 87, when he sort of went down he was going down the spiral of heroin addiction, all that sort of stuff. And you basically you're reading it and just start to think, oh, wow, like you can really see like how things spiraled the way they did. And like, Motley Crue were like one of the biggest rock bands in the world at that time. But even in spite of everything, just the pressures of touring and all that sort of stuff, it was just putting this weight on them as a band. And so through this time, Nicky's talking quite, openly about what's going on with him, and you can just see the way it spirals down. And there's other books that I've heard. Scar Tissue by Anthony Kiedis is a great read. I haven't actually read it myself, but the thing is reading that, I just thought to myself, you know what, like, imagine if I just started keeping a journal. Now, I wasn't in a rock band at the time or anything like that, but like I was in my 20s, and I lived in Brisbane at the time, and I had a bunch of mates that, we'd go out every weekend on the town, that sort of stuff, as you tend to do when you're that age. And I just thought, oh man, imagine if I just started like talking about what was going on with me and what was going on with us and all that sort of stuff, and just write it as it is. So I at the start of the next New Year, which was like a couple of months later, at the start of that New Year's Day, I just started keeping a journal. I didn't write every single day. I don't think there's ever been a time where I was writing literally every single day. And there's a number of ways that you can go about it. And that's changed a bit over the years, and I'll get to that in a bit. But if I'm to look back on that journal from that first year now, there's a lot of stuff where I'll just read and go, oh, this is so cringe, or this isn't. It's just that's the first thing that's occurred to me, is that if you consistently keep a journal over many years, over time you begin to notice the things that weren't actually a big deal, but you thought that they were. And it's just
self-reflection.
It is. It's a bittersweet feeling, because you look back and you think, oh, you know what, that wasn't actually I don't know why I was so concerned about this, or I don't know why I didn't see this, what it actually was. And the other side of that has gone, well, obviously, like I was at this point on the mountain, and now I'm higher up, and you just in ways that you couldn't even perceive.
It's a point of contrast though, isn't it? Like that's yeah, I just like, as you were saying though, I was like, oh, that's interesting because that's like one of those benefits then of actually doing that at the time, which you're not thinking at that time. In the future, I'm going to be reflecting back and I'll have this interesting realization. You're just doing it at the time, right? And then,
that's it.
And then in retrospect, like the power of retrospect and helping you to maybe like reaffirm what things are really good now, or like, hey, like you're going, which you wouldn't otherwise, you may not, I mean, like you might have that realization, but then maybe you wouldn't because you don't have it's like seeing old photographs. Like you generally have memories of stuff, but then like seeing a particular photo, and I'm sort of maybe writing too, it seems like a form of time travel to me.
It is, yeah.
Because it's like that snapshot that you did then that your memory doesn't necessarily capture in exactly the same way. I mean, it sort of does, but then rereading it or re-seeing it or like, re-seeing a video or photo or reading something that you wrote automatically transports you back. And
that's right.
It's really interesting.
And so look, obviously there's the advantage that your writing skills improve over time if you're doing that. But then there are other things as well. Like, for instance, the last year that I lived on the Gold Coast, because I did live on the Gold Coast for a couple of years there too. That was a very hectic time. And I have touched on this in articles that I've written before, where I talked about certain periods of my life that have been like this. And the best way I can describe it metaphorically is it would be like if you were climbing up a mountain, right? So you're climbing up a mountain and occasionally you get a rest stop, but when you get a rest stop, you never have more than 30 seconds to sit down and to drink some water, and you got to keep climbing up the mountain, just plugging away and away. So all this time I'm keeping a journal, that sort of stuff. At the end of that particular year, I had no more reason to be there on the Gold Coast. The reasons that I moved there, they weren't really relevant anymore, all that sort of stuff. And so I moved back down here to the Central Coast. I've got old friends here. I've got family here. And, geographically speaking, like you're only 45 minutes an hour from Sydney. Like it just made sense to do that. And it wasn't until looking back, I went back and I read through that journal that whole last year I was on the Gold Coast. This is probably a couple of years later. And I'm reading back through the journal and just remembering what my life was actually like. And I thought to myself, you know what? Like, I'm really fortunate that I pulled the pin when I did that, because I think if I'd kept going, I was probably like a few months away from like burning out completely, like just, but why that was useful is because reading those entries from that whole year in my journal, it just made me go, all right, I can't ever get to that stage again. And there are certain, like, it's just funny because as a business owner, and I'm sure it's a universal experience, you have these times in business where things feel quiet. It's just, things are just, there's not a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And then conversely, you have these times where it's just like everything's coming in, and it's like at any time you have at least three things that you're managing at the same time, and it's all very, but what it did is that looking back through those old journal entries, it gave me the perspective to go, okay, well, if you've got all this stuff going on, that's fine. But if you start to feel like you're going to that stage where you were at that point in your life, that last year that you're on the Gold Coast, then that's a good sign to pull back, because it's just not worth going down that path. And that, for instance, was the inspiration behind me writing an article. I can't remember the title of it out loud, unfortunately, Saul, but it was about staying business fit and about finding the right time to take time off so that you're running at your maximum capacity when it comes to organizing people, making decisions, doing what it is that you do best as a business owner, about your own sort of self-maintenance, about that. So that inspired that as an example. There have been other times, like I've heard you mention before that you did martial arts training.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, that's always been a big influence on my wife and I. We did taekwondo for many years, and then hapkido, and our and then our club, and just our experience. Like I remember having this conversation with a mate at our club, and he had this interesting perspective, and he wasn't a religious person, but probably, from his self unprofessed being a spiritual person. And he was sort of saying, it's like our own little, version of religion, like in the sense, and what he meant, like he probably didn't say it exactly like that, but what he was getting at in this conversation was that the things that the reasons that, like, a lot of people become a Christian or a Muslim or whatever that is partly cultural, but then for some people it's also finding some meaning in the world, or to be with other people, or to be in a community. And that's what he was sort of getting at, was our club. And, it obviously comes down to the group of people too. Like you would know from any networking group, not the same thing, but there's similar reasons why people become, entrenched in their martial arts club or their networking group or their social group or whatever. It's because people like to be around other people. They like to hear, and it's comforting. And then when it is combined with, in the martial arts sense, like, values and things that I still really hold very dear and very true about helping other people, just like all the fundamental things that most people readily accept as good. It's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Like, all pretty much like, Christian values, you could say the same thing about. They're generally, no one's ever going to, for the most part, go, no, that's a bad idea. Yeah, history of Christianity, blah, blah, blah. Sure. Some things by institutions, but all the actual values, they're good. They're good things to live by. And there's similar things. Yeah. And there's like similar things in, that we found in that club, as to why we joined, then why we stayed, and why it became important to us. And then there's just the fun aspect of, being able to kick people and, that does help. Yeah. And sort of spar and fight. But that's also then, I've always reflected on that. And I've found that there's two things though. There's physical and the mental and spiritual, all very much entwined in each other in martial arts, not any martial arts, but like it was our experience that was the case.
Yeah. Well, no, I asked because I trained Goju Kai for a number of years on and off. Started out in Brisbane, and trained down here on the coast for a number of years. But the reason I bring it up is that there would be times, for instance, where I'd be at training and I'd be doing a particular kata, and then for some reason there would be something running along in the background of my mind, and then I'd have a revelation about something. Like, oh, you know what? This particular, not necessarily to do with martial arts at all, but just something else from my life, something else from the past, and I go, that suddenly makes sense why, like that this particular moment was pivotal for these reasons or this. And so then once I got home, I'd write about it. And sometimes, like, I'd be writing in terms of from when I started writing to then when I went back and made sure I had all the right details and everything. It would take me well over an hour just to write that entry, start to finish. And then I also did that last year. I lived on the Gold Coast as well. I actually did a 10-week boxing program. It was called Fight Like a Pro. Unfortunately, the gym isn't there anymore. So in the off chance that Gavin Top or any of the guys from Fight Like a Pro are listening to me, reach out. It'd be great to get in contact, because I really do miss that 10-week period. I bring this up because, again, I just went in because I just thought, I want to learn. I learn something different. I want to learn how to box. I obviously had done Goju Kai, but I want to learn how to box.
Yeah.
And I listened to your podcast with I hope I'm pronouncing the name right here, with Gio Silinesu.
Oh, yeah.
You go, yeah. But something that he was talking about, I think towards the end of that particular podcast, he was talking about how he would make certain decisions, or you will make certain decisions And then you learn lessons that you didn't expect to learn just from doing that particular thing. It's like, oh, isn't it interesting that doing A, I ended up learning about B, C, D, and all these other things that you don't expect to get when you sign up for it. And this was that's what it was like for me with boxing. Like, I actually wrote an article and published an article recently, and people can find that on the Scribe website. And it's learning to fight taught me these three things. And I go into detail about that whole 10-week program and just things that I learned during the whole training process that had a kick-on effect when it came to business, when it came on to just how I view life itself. And I didn't expect that. I seriously remember sitting down with Gavin in the gym the day that I signed up. And Gavin, with his typical enthusiasm, is saying, oh, this will be, the greatest thing you've ever done. We get guys coming back to fight again and again. And I'm honestly sitting there and I'm thinking, yeah, of course Gavin's giving it the big sell.
He's going to be saying that, yeah.
Yeah, but what, he was right. Like, I could understand why so many guys would go through this 10-week program and then just keep coming back to train at the gym. Like, guys they'd come back and they'd train up the other guys. Or in my case, I got invited back and I fought again. It was great. And I would love to have. I'll tell you something true, Saul. When I moved away to the Central Coast, like, for probably the first 6 months that I moved back, I was low-key hoping that I would get a call from Gavin going, oh, Ben, are you able to come and help us fight? And I seriously would have called one of my mates in Queensland, said, hey, look, I'm coming to yours for a bit, and I would have trained. That's how much I loved it. I would have gone back and done that. But writing about that experience again helped me to convert that into blog articles. So that like, for people that are wondering how they do this, I would recommend that you just have a Word document or something, or maybe you'd rather write on your phone. I would prefer to go something digital that you can write and then you can easily copy it, all that sort of stuff, save it. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, make it easy for yourself.
Yeah, but then the next step is recording your thoughts. Now, as I did say, I lived in Brisbane for a number of years. I lived in 8 Mile Plains for a couple of years, then lived in Coorparoo. And the thing about being a solo entrepreneur like I was at the time is that, you got lots of free time to sort of do as you want to do and all that sort of stuff. But when you're just working from home and apart from stepping out for a meeting with somebody or going to a business event, like, you spend a lot of time by yourself. And I'm not going to name any names here, but I do see people in a range of different fields, and there's no doubt they're great at what they do. But when they opine on a lot of things, I wonder how much time they've spent interacting with people out in the world, just in the general world. One of the things that we're at risk of becoming at the moment is a very atomized society where people just have their little bubbles and don't think outside of that. And you can see the limitations in some people's thinking. So I'm a high energy person. Like, I love to write, love to draw, paint, all that sort of stuff, but I can't just spend hours and hours and hours sitting in a seat. I have to get up and move. So when I was this is back when I was living in Brisbane, it would be like maybe a Friday or something, and I'd just go, all right, this is all done for the week. I've called these people, done all this, just go for a walk. And I'd get up, and like I said, at the time I was living in Coorparoo, and those of you who know Brisbane know it's like in the inner eastern suburbs. You're probably like, if you walk, you're probably an hour from the CBD.
Yeah.
And I just walk through the suburbs and like walk through the neighborhoods. I just wanted to see what was going on in the world outside of my place. And this became like a regular habit. I'd go out for a walk, spend half the day, just especially in the warmer months, everything. And it was a good time in my life, that was. So I moved back down to the Central Coast, and after a while I just started to think, oh, you know what, I'd love to sort of hike through the old neighborhoods up there in Brisbane or on the Gold Coast and just like see the way things are. And as we know, COVID hit. So then that sort of put things on hold for a little while. But then finally in this last year, I've managed to go back to the Gold Coast. And just that was really interesting. That was, Saul, because I went back and I walked through these old neighborhoods, and the last year that I lived there, as I've said, that was when I was doing Fight Like a Pro, did that 10-week program. It was just a really hectic year, where as I said, I was probably a few months away from burning out if I didn't change something up. So to go back there and to see everything and so much of it, like the places I used to walk and all that sort of stuff, like on a Sunday, like those, that all looks the same, but I was really aware of how much I have changed in less than a decade since I was there. That was fascinating.
That's an interesting point, because I've had the same experience with certain things recently, and I often, and then it makes you wonder, why you're different too, because sometimes it's really obvious and it really stands out and you're like, well, I know it's because of like this, and this. But like I've found in recent times, and I think I sort of know why for the most part, that certain activities that I used to like doing, like I'm a big movie buff, or like particular sorts of movies, and I'm and some movies like Blade Runner and things like that, I've watched like countless amount of times.
Yeah.
So know them inside out. And I found in recent times that I used to be able to go and just for relaxation, that I would go, I'll just put a movie on, right? And just watch that same movie over and over. I don't find I can do that now in the same way. And I thought, I wonder why that is. Is it just, reach a particular age and like things like, different cliched things that you hear? I was like, no, it's because my set of things that I find more engaging and more important has changed. And one of those key things in terms of just like, absorbing media has been, I've read a reasonable amount over years, but I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, and I've been able to get through like stupid amount of content just on driving and stuff, like ridiculous amount of books that I would never have read otherwise. And I've been listening to, anything from the whole record of all Sherlock Holmes stories read by Stephen Fry, and you name it, like a whole heap of other historical things that I've been listening to. And I've found that more and more and more that when I'm just listening to these things, that I get that it's so much richer and more interesting. It doesn't mean other movies that I like that aren't good, but I just don't find the same level of interest. And I've thought, and I've sort of analyzed myself, and I've gone, I think that just means that is somewhere in my, mind and, heart, or sort of whatever, those things, that level of richness in terms of information and stories just has a lot more meaning for me now. And it makes other things not seem a little bit more pale in comparison. They seem like a bit more vanilla overall.
I get that. Yeah.
And I've sort of, and I've even when I've known that, then I've sort of gone, I'll just give it another go. I'll just like try and watch that movie, and I'll get, through the start of it and go, it's just not very interesting.
Yeah.
I'll just stop and just put it down, and then like do something else. Or then like I said before, I've been like, I have this new phone, and it's a good sort of bridge over to doing other drawing again. I've been doing that, and I found myself it was like, wow, hour and a half went by, and I was just doing this little sketch. And it's just so much more, the word rich seems to be the most descriptive word I can think of currently for that, like the experience of that actual experience at the time. And it gets back to a bit of what you were saying before about, like, I find for me these days the most valuable and the most sort of significant things are those little sort of experiences.
Yeah.
That sort of moment, where you're doing something and you're able to pinpoint it more in your mind. It's got more value for you somehow.
That's right. Yeah. I'm sort of with you when it comes to movies these days. I'll really only pop a movie on if I'm making dinner. And it's like, yeah, all right, I'll watch this. So it's like the whole experience, making dinner, watching the movie, sitting down, eating dinner, and then having dessert, whatever, while the movie's going on. Like, I'm conscious of time like that. When it comes to drawing or painting as well, like, they're great opportunities, not just to create a piece, but also because then you can sit down and listen to podcasts like this one.
Yeah.
As I said, I listened to a couple of your previous podcasts when I was out for a walk, or I was just practicing snooker up at the Down at Leagues Club. So they've got full-size snooker tables there. So I just, go, all right, put the headphones in. I'll just play myself until the podcast finishes of this particular episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about multitasking, because it's just, you start to realize how important time is. Like, I'm not one of these people. I'm not one of these people who goes, oh wow, the year's gone by so quickly. I'm not one of these people who freaks out whenever I hit like a milestone birthday or an anniversary. These things feel inevitable to me, Saul, because I'm always keeping in mind of the time. So I'm like right now we're a month out from Christmas, and to me I'm just like, yeah, that feels about right. There's like, coincidentally or not, this year 2024 for me, there's been a lot that's happened. One of the other things that's happened, just in case there are people who've been listening to this going, yes, but Ben, you haven't told us the next stage of journaling. It's okay. It's okay. I hadn't forgotten you. And this ties into what I'm about to share with you here, Saul. How it ties in is that in this last year, I've been back to Brisbane twice, because I said that I wanted to go back and I wanted to see the old neighborhoods. I had some old friends I wanted to catch up with. I've been wanting to do that for a couple of years, and then obviously COVID delayed things. Now, if you've spent your lifetime living up there, if you've spent years up there, what I'm about to say might sound crazy, but I've always enjoyed Brisbane and sort of southeast Queensland in the summertime. As somebody who writes, it's very, for lack of a better word, it's poetic. There's just the long days, there's that mugginess that hangs in the air. The jacaranda trees come out in full bloom. And then, the typical sort of Brisbane summer days, it's a long, hot day, it's muggy. Then at around 6 p.m., the dark clouds start to come in. Hopefully you finished work or whatever, or you're home by then. And it just starts to pour down. You get the evening storms, and it's very easy to write about that. Very poetic. And so
said like a true poet, Ben.
Yeah. And so I wanted to go back to Brisbane in the summertime to, walk the old neighborhoods, like walk the old routes that I used to walk and see, because I hadn't been up since about 2017. So I'm like, oh, I wonder what's changed in 7 years. Wanted to do that, see the old neighborhoods and to experience Brisbane in that particular time of year. And that was great. Now, what I realized is that because I was going to be out walking a lot during the day, and that there'd probably be little things where I'd be like, oh yeah, I remember this, have these little flashbacks. My first thought was that I'd just take a notepad and I'd just scribble down all the notes. And then I just thought, well, you know what? That just sounds like a waste to me. I've got a device in my pocket that can literally record hours of me talking.
Yeah.
Just use that. And so that's what I did. I'd like walk past like the place where I used to live there in Cooperoo, like walk through that area, head further east, like up over the Gateway Bridge, walk into the city, like through the valley, all that stuff, all these old areas I used to go. And whenever something came to me, I just make little notes on my phone, like, it's 11:34 a.m. on like Friday or whatever, and I'm at such and such a place, and this is really interesting, or this feels like this, or this is. And then when I got home later that night, when I got back to my mate's place, who I was staying with, I just sit on the bed with the fan on full ball, and I'll just listen back to my notes through the day, and I'd write that. And that would take like an hour and a half. Like, it was a long task, Saul, but I had to get it all out there. So if you're somebody who's going to journal, you can do it the way I've experienced it. You can do it one of two ways. You can just remember stuff, and then when you get back home or to your office or whatever, sit down and record it all. Or you can literally record it as you think it. And then you can go back and you can transcribe it. So in my experiences, it was funny going back to Brisbane because there was so much that just felt like it hadn't changed. Now, obviously, if you go into the CBD, like they're doing all these major renovations to hopefully get things done in time for the Olympics. But when I went out through the old neighborhoods and that, like just so much still felt the same, but I didn't have this mad nostalgia hit. I didn't sort of have, for lack of a better word, this yearning to go back. Like, I realized that what I was missing was a specific period in time. And
it was a memory of it you had too, right? It was your impression from memory.
That's it. It was the period in time, and it was the people. And a lot of the people have moved on, as they inevitably do. Brisbane was just the backstage. It was just the canvas on which this whole story took place. And I went back in the springtime, like around my birthday, to catch up with people again, that sort of stuff. And I did some more of the walks, and I realized, I think it was like the second last day I was there. I remember it clearly. I'd sort of walked like, if you know Brisbane well, I'd sort of gone up over the Gateway and then like through the racecourse suburbs, like through Hamilton, around the river and that. And I'd sort of walked up in the late afternoon sun up to Ascot Station, which is just a very quiet suburban station. And I remember standing there, and it just, to me, it felt like closure. It just felt like, you know what,
Interesting.
I've been up here twice now. I've seen everything that I wanted to see. But I had to come back and see it a second time just to be sure. Almost like if you've got a wall and you apply a coat of paint over that wall. Now you can see what color the wall is meant to be from the coat of paint, but you have to go and you have to apply a second coat of paint just so it really sets in. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I'd gone up and applied a second coat of paint over this wall. And I'm saying this all, I'm recording this all on my phone so I don't forget, like I don't get home later and go, oh, how did I put it?
It's different. It's different though, isn't it? I mean, like even if you got a really good memory, like your memory does funny things to your perspective.
It does, yeah.
On it, like it really does. Like I find myself, and I'm constantly sort of amazed. Like when you got like I have this with my wife a lot too. We know each other really, really well, but like even with us, like you're having a conversation about something, someone is saying one thing and you're taking it in from a particular perspective. Then later on, you remember that conversation kind of differently. You don't think you have because you've just remembered it, right? And you've just gone, oh yeah, right. And it's not like anything that, you know, turns into any big deal, but it's just like, oh, you said this. And they're like, no, I didn't. I didn't say that at all. And then you're quite sure, you know, because your memory, you know, for whatever reason, like that sort of cache that you've got in your mind to store and to temporarily store things, because like you know, you input stuff, you temporarily store certain things, you store other things in a different way. Yeah. And part of that goes, but in your mind, you're just like, that's how I saw it. You know, that's fine. Instead of, and it's like if you go, you take a photo of something as opposed to remembering it too. And you look back and you go, I don't remember that little detail about it. Or, you know, and it's sort of, it's just, and so just highlighting what you were saying, like the power of doing it on the spot is really significant because, I actually look back, it was really funny. When I went overseas with my mum, when I was like, 15, we had sold, a house and, we had a bit of, well, not we, she had a little bit of, money and we went on this really good trip overseas and we saw relatives over in Finland and various places. And I wrote a diary at the time. Okay. And so I had like a proper, you know, this is my travel diary. And it was a nice little case. And I ended up filling up the first one and bought another one overseas. And I looked and I had this memory of this sort of, you know, I was like, I'm 15, so like a while ago. And general memory of, I put a lot of specific detail into my diary. And then when I actually looked in the diary, it wasn't really the case at all. It was pretty, like there was some detail and it was still like really interesting, but it wasn't my romanticized version of what I had in my mind. And I was thinking about that and I thought, oh, that's really funny that I did that. And I thought it's kind of like a mix of my actual memories of things then and stuff that I just don't really remember very clearly at all, mixed then with what I remember that I wrote. Then there was some things that was like, I just don't remember writing that at all. And that was fun. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And that transported me back. But it's like you know, it seems to tie in like all this stuff we're talking about in terms of journaling, memory, and then leading to particular realizations to the fact that just the sort of key point that I've brought up a few times on the podcast with people in the past too, and it's like a real point of interest to me that the doing of things is like a really underrated sort of activity, like, you know, planning, and yeah, people talk about this all the time. People are like, you know, just there's only so much planning you can do. All the real learning in almost everything, I think, from what we're talking about, sport, I think just about everything you can imagine is in the doing of things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's where you've got the learnings or the realizations is through the activity.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's funny because another podcast of yours I listen to, you talk about people you've been speaking with. I listened to Will Polston's podcast, and the thing that especially stood out to me the most when I was listening to him was he was talking about how he had this goal to climb Mont Blanc. And he had imagined, how great is it going to be when I actually do this and everything. And he said he'd taken like a celebratory Kit Kat or a Mars bar, I think it was, but that he had gone and he'd done this climb at Mont Blanc at last. It was freezing cold, some weird time of the morning or something to do it. And then he said, but once he actually climbed it, when he was at the peak, it was just like, all right, well, that's it. And that totally resonated with me because there are so many times where I've been excited for a particular creative project. Whether we're talking a painting that I want to do or a drawing that I was like, yeah, I want to do this particular watercolor, or I'm going to write this book or something. And you get to this point where you finish it, where it's like, all right, everything that I need to do here has been done. I've fixed up these little details. I've added these little dashes of paint where they needed to go just to really set this thing off.
Yeah.
I've made the final edits to the story. I've done just a couple more drawn just a couple little more details here, and that's it. And perhaps the most black-pilling thing, for lack of a better word, I can tell people is that it rarely, if ever, is as good as you imagine that it's going to feel when you finish it. It's just more that, for me, it's just always this, and again, this will sound kind of morbid to people, just almost this sort of mild relief that if I drop dead tomorrow, at least like I didn't die with this particular project left in me. It's there to be left behind after I'm gone.
Yeah,
and
it's the doing. It's the
it
doing
is the
of
doing.
it.
It's always like the 10-week Fight Like a Pro program. As I said in the article, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but for me, the best feeling wasn't necessarily the end of that, the fight night, the end of it. It was when I look back now, it was little things along that way, that story. And it's the same as when I've been working on particular projects, and I can remember certain podcasts that I was listening to and ideas that I heard discussed and that made me go, oh yeah, like a light bulb moment, or just the particular period in my life that I was working on a particular medium. It's those things, isn't it? It's very rarely the actual end. It's the actual making of the thing that's where you get the juice. And it doesn't just come in one big concentrated form, does it? It's just tiny little, again, for lack of a better word, tiny little micro doses. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I've brought this up a number of times. I think on the podcast, I play squash, and so I've often pondered in the past, and I now know why. I've pondered as to why I don't really ever have, I could say quite safely ever at the end when I win a game, when I win, I don't have any elation. So, and then I've often compared, I've gone, how do I feel when I have had a really tight game and it's been really, really hard fought and I've lost or won? And I've thought it's interesting because I often have more satisfaction if I've got a really hard fought game and I've lost and it's been really tight and a real incredible kind of concentrated story of highs and lows that are really sort of extreme, this sort of fight between two people, than any feeling that I have if I've had an easy win. I feel absolutely nothing. I don't feel enjoyment. And all the excitement and all the thrill and the fun and everything that's enjoyable about it isn't the individual rallies or shots or something crazy that happened or somebody did something. It's all during that, and then that sort of struggle. That's why I always feel very strongly about in sport especially, that it's very valuable to actually have kind of not for the thing itself, but to have, say, winners and losers in things, not to make any person feel good or bad, but to have a mechanism by which, like, you can essentially have a struggle against yourself, because that's what it always is. Like, it's, because if you don't have a mechanism to go, one person wins this, this sort of score, like have a sort of games and scores. If you don't have that mechanism, or, if you're going in martial arts, you don't have a system of belts or whatever, that's just a mechanism to kind of measure where you're at in the journey, as far as I'm concerned. And because the actual feeling, like I said, that I have when I win, often isn't sort of anything. It's like anything good out of it was during while I was doing it. So, but it's still important to, because in that case, like, you've got a team and you've got 4 people and you have to have somebody win or lose on the night. It's just like a mechanism of that, for the whole system. So, like, I really don't agree with the whole, idea that's put out there these days of, like, everyone's a winner. And I just don't, it makes absolutely no sense to me, because it's not about, it shouldn't be about everybody needs to feel good, because how do you then improve? Like, how do you realize, it's not about somebody feeling good or bad. It's about, a mechanism by which you can learn, like, how to just improve yourself. That's what it's about.
Yeah, that's it. It's funny because I remember back through high school, I did pretty well, like, in cross country, or maybe some people call it marathon, whatever. But yeah, cross country, I did really well in that event. But pretty much every year there was like one other guy who was better than me. It wasn't always the same guy. It was just, depending on what school I was at, there was like that one guy or maybe 2 guys who were always just, 10 meters ahead of me. Couldn't quite catch him. And then one year, pre-season footy training, I remember, we're just doing laps. And I just changed the way that I was running all of a sudden. I went, well, instead of why don't I just work out? Because I knew who the fittest guys were in the team. I knew the guys who'd be out the front. Why not just make my whole race, just stay with them and then sort of pull it out towards the end?
Yeah.
And then I came in first. I remember one of the trainers nicknaming me Steve Monaghetti at the end, like as a bit of a joke. Oh, yeah, we've got Steve Monaghetti over here. And then that year at the high school cross country, I was in my senior year at high school, like year 12. And I thought, why don't I just do what I was doing at footy training? So I did that. And I won that race. First time in like my entire schooling life that I won like school cross country. And I picked my last year to do it of all the years. And then I went to I think it was regional, and it was down at the Olympic mountain bike track in Sydney, like Western Sydney or whatever. Now, the thing with this race is that we were split into 2 different age groups. I turned 18 my final year of school. So I was with the 18 years boys. And we ran against the 17 years boys. So there were like guys in year 11, guys in my grade who only turned 17 that year. And on top of that, you got guys from other schools. So I don't know everybody else I'm running with. And we're getting to the last lap of the race. And I still remember clearly, like, I'm running along the top ridge of the mountain bike track, and I'm looking downhill, like down the mountainside towards the open field where the start finish line is, all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking, you know what? Like, by my estimate, I'm probably coming about 7th or 8th, but this is actually this is a personal best for me. I've never run better than I have in this race. I'm actually really pleased with how I've gone this race, because this is like my personal best at this level. I've never run better than this. And I get down the hill and we come up to the finish line, and a couple of the teachers are standing like at where the finish line is, and they're holding their clipboards, and then one of them calls out, "Are you 17 or 18 years?" I said, 18 years. And she goes, "Oh, over this side." And she points to like the right hand side of this tape. And as I'm running up, I then hear her turn to one of the timekeepers, and she goes, "Oh, we've got our first 18 years boy here." So I won that. I won that event, the 18 years boys, and I didn't know it until I reached the finish line. But the buzz was, following on what you were talking about, is that I was already at this point where I had done better than I had done at that level before, and it was a personal best. So to get first place in that was just a bonus.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's really curious. And there's this idea that I have been having when I play. I like puzzles generally, right? Like, putting together puzzles. And I think it's the only game I actually have on my phone. It's like a puzzle game. It's quite a good one. It's just like this, simulated wood block, puzzle game. And I just like it. It sort of, stimulates my mind when you just want to do something random in between things. And I've noticed this funny thing that happens when I play it. And what it is, and it's become, and it's generally always true. And it seems to flow on to other observations in my life, which is that when I'm playing it, if I'm just going, okay, I'm putting this piece here, putting this piece there, and I'm just completely focused on doing each piece after one another. Mm-hmm. And I'm not looking at the actual score, because like the more you do, and because it's one of those ones where then if you can't fit it in, the game stops. But if you do keep fitting them in and you do it the right way, the score goes up and up and up. And so when I'm just focusing on it, I find it's fun, and I always get a higher score. But as soon as I look at the score, as soon as I actually focus or generally focus on, oh, wow, I'm doing well, soon after that, or not too long after that, things fall apart. And I thought, that's really curious, because what that means to me is it's like, it's linked to kind of what we're talking about. It's like when you're in the moment, it happens in squash too. It's like, some people call it like when you're in the zone, right? And you're just, and it's always relates to, in my reflection on it, it relates to being focused on like that Zen sort of thing, on like, if you're like sweeping the floor, like, no, you're sweeping, just focus on that. It's like when you're doing this activity, whatever it is, just doing that and not focusing on like the end goal or the result or whatever. As soon as your mind, I thought that's such a powerful thing, because it's also very powerful because the mind can then seem to then very easily slip you out of that focus when you have a distraction or something, and next thing you know, it's like, oh, it's over and I've lost my focus. Like, and that seems to be like a key point. And it's been highlighted with this little game, because every time I do it, and all of a sudden I'm going, oh wow, I'm doing really well with the score. I'm going to beat my record, my highest score. Then soon after that, I lose. And I thought, okay, that's obviously, there's some important message there that I need to understand, which I generally know what it is, but then it's like, okay, keeping my focus just means kind of simply that, just keeping my focus.
Outcome independence, they call it. That's the way that I always just think of it. If I think that it's one thing to be aware of it, it's another thing to actually consciously realize it when it's happening. But that's sort of thing that causes me to snap back. I recently, or earlier this year, read the Eckhart Tolle book, The Power of Now. And that really just made me think, yeah, you know what? Like, it's so easy. It's literally so easy just to stop letting your thoughts cloud the experience of right now, the here and now, especially when you're doing an important task, whether it's, whether it's painting, drawing, martial arts, like race driving. I used to race go-karts, actually. Like, it's about being in that moment. And there's also outcome independence. I just always think of outcome independence. You're not worried about how is this going to turn out, or how am I doing in comparison to this. You're absolutely right with that. Look, again, in regards to your writing, like, I would say that if people want to start a journal, and journaling flows on to so many other things, it flows on into your, like I said, your business copy, your website, socials, writing blog articles. Something that I do every week when I sit down on a Monday is I go through the things that I achieved in the past week, and I also go through the highlights. Think of it like a highlights reel. I've got, this was really fun, or that was funny, or that, and just the good things. But then what I also have a section for is what I learned. Was there anything that I learned in the past week? Now, some weeks there's like nothing comes to mind. Fair enough. I'm not just going to fill it for the sake of filling it. But other weeks, there'll absolutely be something. Maybe even 2 big lessons that I learned in the past week. And I'll put that away because what I do with my journals if people are wondering if I just have this huge file that goes, back over 12 years now of all my journals.
Yeah.
No, every year I start a new journal and I give it a title and a cover page, almost like if you're a band and you're creating an album. What are you going to name the album? What's the cover art? That sort of thing. And I do that. every single New Year's Day. I create my new journal,
That's
save my
fun.
old one.
Yeah.
I'm up to 50,000 words this year. And I haven't,
wowzers.
I've gone nearly entire weeks without writing. Things have just been hectic, so I haven't really, but I can go back and I can sort through these journals. And, aside from those, I also have, going back probably 7 or 8 years now, things I learned for that particular year, because I'll just keep putting that in that file. So if I want content, if I'm looking for ideas for blog articles, that I can go back through the things that I learned, maybe even for the past year, maybe even 5 years ago, and go, oh, that would actually be worth talking about.
That's a great tip. Yeah. Do you actually talk to clients about that? Like in that sort of idea? Because that's as you were saying that's just like, it's like when you build up a lot of source material, whether it's like writing, visual, you got like all this stuff that you can refer to. I mean, that sounds like a really great tip or reason to like start a journal, if not anything else, like to then have some, material that you're not going to necessarily remember that you can call on at some future point.
Yeah, look, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Journaling manifests into a number of things, like your website content, blog articles, also just realizations about your life and about the things you learn. So it's really helping your ability to write both in a business sense and also in a personal sense, but it's also helping you as a business owner to succeed professionally, but also to give you the tools that are going to make you more effective at what you do and, dare I say, more content as well. So yeah, absolutely. The things that I've learned section definitely would tie in with that, just the end of it or the start of every new week, what I learned the past week, and save that away somewhere. And again, over time that starts to build up, and then you've got like literally a whole catalog that you can go back and you can access if it's like, okay, what am I going to talk about here? Or I'm talking about this particular point in my life or writing about it. Like, how did this bit go again? And what was this detail like? And you just go back. And if you've got it all itemized, then it makes it very easy to access. Right? Yeah. That's what it's really about. It's about getting the ideas out there and making them easy to access so that you can find them at a moment's notice when you need them later on. That's really
an important part, hey? Like, because and that is one of certainly the best things about, on all modern smartphones too and other devices is there's good tools. Like that's one thing. There's a lot of things, even though like I'm a digital tools person and I like those things. There's a lot of things I don't like about it, but there's a bunch of stuff about like when they're used right to organize things well and to do things quickly. Like you were saying, like if you're recording audio notes and stuff, that's as excellent, or listening to things, like I've been doing when you can, cause like audio content, and I'm not sure of the statistics now in terms of like people inputting podcasts or audio content versus video, but I know it was increasing. It was like it is like a very strong competitor, like worldwide, to amount of audio content inputted versus video. And it might be, I'm sure it's probably not higher than video, but it's certainly in like a changing world where perhaps more people are trying to, are doing a activity, whether it's physical or like me, I'm driving, or when I'm doing like, a lot, because I've been doing a lot of like house renovations, a lot of like stuff like paint stripping and painting and stuff, and listening like to, like I've been doing recently, re-listening to all of Sherlock Holmes, which is like, which is especially funny because I find myself, especially with Sherlock Holmes, because they're so funny and so sort of smart, and just actually find myself looking at the world, because I've been listening to so much of it. I find myself looking through this sort of lens of minute observation, like in sort of Sherlock Holmes stories of going, that means this, which is like, which is just like a sort of a point of interest about like the influence that good content, can sort of have on you, whether it's like then your own content too. But like on the subject of when people are actually either writing or typing, do you have a particular view about whether like handwriting is better than typing, or whether it's like, have you got a specific view on that?
Yeah, look, I have heard, I'm trying to remember who it was. It was many years ago. It was at a conference that I was at. They were talking about how when you are actually handwriting, it opens up a particular part of your brain and that sort of thing. So look, I can't prove or disprove that on the spot.
Yeah.
What I can say is that in the past, there have been stories that I've written, and the draft I would write by hand. I'd write by hand in an exercise book, and then I'd go away later, and on the edit, I'd actually type that on like Word or some program like that. I just, for the sake of time efficiency these days, I pretty much just type everything out. But I'm not saying that's the way everybody else should do it. If you can find the time to actually write something down by hand and then type it up, good for you. And if you find that there's particular advantages that you find in terms of what you're coming out with when you're just free to take a pen or a pencil and then just scribble that down in a notebook, fine, go right ahead. This is one of those ones where I can't really say with expert authority that one is better than the other. You shouldn't bother it. I know why I do what I do, but maybe in the long term I'll realize that's to my detriment. For me, it's really just time efficiency. Anything else.
You'll have some future realization. They'll be like, I should have been writing this whole time.
I know.
Sure. But I've actually found I had a little realization, which is actually thanks to this new phone. I'm not gonna, this isn't like, I'm not being paid to promote like the Samsung S Ultra S24, because I just got this new phone, right? So, and I like sort of tech things, but what I found too, was the tools in the past with the, writing to text feature in the past when I've used it, which hasn't been for a couple of years, it was a bit ho-hum. It was a bit sort of, it's a bit not, it's sometimes good, sometimes not. But I actually found, I just thought, because in their little help things was going, learn how to use your new phone. And I actually generally go through that because I figured there's generally things I won't know. So I was going through it and they were like, pull out your pen. And so all the writing, and my writing isn't as good as it has been because I haven't been doing it a lot, or drawing, like I said before, but the writing, like even when I was sending a text, I was doing fairly scribbly writing, and the AI in relation to the writing to text is really like quite excellent. So I was thinking, maybe that's actually a cool sweet spot between those two things. And I sort of asked that question just to hear if you had any particular thoughts, because I kind of don't either. I don't have any expert knowledge. That's just what I'm similar to what you said. But then I actually found I was writing and it was pretty dorky because I haven't been writing heaps. So I was writing and they just had this feature where instead of texting in, I could just sort of essentially write on the screen over the top of it. And it was actually translating it like really, absolutely perfectly, except for one thing into text. And I thought that's an interesting sweet spot between them that I think I'm going to start to do more. Because it's quick too, because like this particular one, it's got the pen actually in the phone. So it's not like a separate thing that you can lose and all that. I was like, that's interesting. I'm going to sort of explore that sort of, point as to how that, if that has any significant like, change that I can observe that is good for my mind. But
yeah, if it makes things better. Yeah. And that's a path that you can go down, and you might get to a point where you go, no, that's not really for me, but I gave it a shot.
True.
And then like me, for instance, I remember, we're not talking about writing necessarily here, but I went through this period, and it was the middle of winter as well, where I was setting my alarm for 5 a.m. every morning, like just seeing what that was like, because people had said, you're getting a head start on everybody else, all that sort of stuff. And I tried it for a while, and look, I will admit that it definitely feels like you have more hours in the day. It feels like you get a whole bunch of stuff done, and you'd expect it to be like midday, and you look at the clock, it's like, oh wow, it's only 9:30. That's a buzz. But for me, then the sacrifice is just energy overall. I'd find that in terms of energy levels, I'd sort of start to crash a lot earlier. So look, I gave it a shot, but it wasn't for me. And I know there are people out there who will swear by it and that, but not for me. But hey, at least I gave it a shot, and it might well be the same for you with this new style of writing, or it might not. It might be the thing, like for me, listening to the 10-part Tony Robbins series, Time of Your Life, back around the same time period that I started Scribe, probably 6 months before that, just on the recommendation of a friend. And I was skeptical because I just knew Tony Robbins as the motivational speaker, and people pay thousands of dollars to, and I was just like, yeah, okay, this, I don't know. But I gave it a shot. I gave it a shot, and I loved that series. It completely changed the way that I looked at time. It completely changed the way that I scheduled my day, my week. In fact, the planners that I was talking to you about earlier is based on a model that he kind of lays out in that series. So that had a big effect on me. But at the same time, it could have just been one of those things where I was like, yeah, I get what he's saying, but this isn't for me, and somebody else can pick it up. So it might be that exact same thing for you with this, Saul.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, but it gets back to that if you don't try it or doing it gets back to the doing of it. And I think it's almost, I feel like you can almost boil it down. This might be oversimplifying it, but I feel like you can almost boil it down to a willingness to try things or an unwillingness to do it, because then that's at the fundamental underlying part of, okay, well, if you're going to, I'm like, say I'm like, oh, I'm really busy, I don't have time to do that. Like that thing that people say all the time, I don't have time to do that, which is always, is very loose and it's non-specific. But one thing is, like, then if you don't do it, then you'll never know, first of all. And but it's almost like the willingness to accept the risk that it may be a waste of time is an important point. Like, that's an important point, because if you don't go, maybe not logically with the voice in your head going, I am willing to accept this risk, but as like a legal sort of like thing with yourself, but like just to generally understand that I know I'm going to be trying stuff, and it could be frustrating because it could be a complete flop, but you have to do that, because if you don't, then you'll never get to either realize that thing is right, or the tangential thing that branches off that will be right, or the one that branches off that will be right, which does happen. It's like this really important lesson that I remember with our lecturer at our QCA in first year, and I'm not sure whether you went through like a similar thing, but with our in illustration, our instructor Chris McKimmey at the time, he had this exercise which I always remember, and there was a few different variations on it, and it was meant to break you out of like certain habits and start to think like, and it was an exercise where you had to do, it was like 100 drawings or something of a particular thing. I think in some instances it was like a pear. It was like a really simple object. It was just like a pear, right? Really boring, just like a pear. And you had to do 100 drawings that were, you were trying proactively to make pretty different, but you had a very limited time frame. It was in like, I think it was like an hour, maybe even less, but I think it was like an hour. And you had to do 100 drawings of this one thing. And it was meant like to break you out of like stylistic habits that you already established after school.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. And there was a bunch of things like that, but they were like mind sort of expanding exercises.
That sounds familiar. Yeah, we had to, I think, let's draw some stuff with like our left hand if we were right-handed and vice versa. That sort of same thing.
Similar.
Just changing it up. Yeah.
Yeah, to be able to sort of break your ego too, past like, and I then actually had a funny experience, because then many years later, I had the chance like to teach the first years in the course that I did. So I was on the other end, and I didn't do that exercise with them, but there was a similar thing where they had to do a particular thing in a certain style or as near to it, right? And there was one particular guy who was very, very, like after school, was really entrenched in this particular watercolor style, and he was like damn good at it. It was like it was really not my cup of tea, but excellent. And it was like, wow, that's really like, you're really quite good. But that was his thing, right? And he was like very after school, after school, you don't know, like you're good at things and you hang your hat on it and you're like, that's my bag and I'm going to stick to it because that's how I got into art college, because I'm awesome at this. And he was like really bloody good at it. And so here comes like Saul, the evil sort of art teacher, who then was like saying to everyone, like with, I have to say, with a little bit of sort of strange relish, like to go, okay, everyone, you got to do it in this style. This is the exercise. This is what you've been graded on. You aren't being graded on how good you are at this or this or this. I already know that. But you're being graded on your ability to do it in this other way. Anyway, like he refused to do it. And I was like, well, yeah, that's easy. You're going to fail because like the exercise is this. It's like saying,
that's it.
Yeah, it's like, and he was like, but I don't want to do it, because I was like, okay, well, that's your choice. You're just going to fail.
That's it.
But it was like hard. It was like, I could see his sort of mind breaking over it. And, I'm not sure what this says about me, but I was like, it was sort of strangely sort of enjoyable. I think part of it because it was me thinking back to how I was probably like that at some point in the past, and me going, oh, that's funny, that I'm on this other end now. But but look, it's like as one sort of last thing as we're getting towards the end of the podcast, like there's I said at the start, there's a little quote sort of thing that I do in every podcast that you are not exempt from, Ben. You are required to give me some sort of quote that you like. What is it, Ben?
Do I fail if I don't?
Yeah, you do.
I don't want it. No, it's all right. And as I said earlier, I have
No,
one.
Ben, there's no winners or losers.
That's okay. This one underpins what I've spoken about today. And obviously I've been focusing mostly on writing, so on journaling, however you decide to do that. And I've mentioned a couple of different ways of doing that, but anything else that you want to see improvement in. And if you don't want to be freaked out by a milestone birthday or anything, my trick is, the thing that I've discovered is to make every day count for something. That's it. And whatever you've got on any single day, do one thing that maybe moves your world forward or makes it feel like you didn't just waste a day. If you can do that every single day, then you're going to see results from that. You're going to see good results from that if you're working on good things that are actually worth something in the long run. So make every day count for something.
I love it. That's great, Ben. That's a fantastic way to end the podcast. And do you you got your website? 'Cause I'll have a link also to it as well. But what's the for everyone listening, where do they find out more about you? What's the URL and where can they go to learn more?
The website? Yeah, sure. www.scribedcopywriting.com.au.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. It's really interesting. Went down some interesting pathways there and stories. It's all about, I mean, it's funny because like what actually ended up happening is kind of reflective of kind of the story of what happens in stories themselves. I always like a good metaphor, so that was like a living metaphor in a way.
Excellent, yeah. And the crazy things is how many things I could have easily spoken about but didn't. Like it's actually it's a good feeling when you've left a lot over. You go, well, man, there's a whole lot. Like I like to think that at least we sort of covered the important stuff.
Oh well, that just means there's heaps of material for future episodes together.
Yeah. If demand is high enough, I could sit down again and do it, Saul. But I know you'd speak to plenty of other amazingly
demand is high
talented
enough.
and accomplished people. So yeah, we'll let the audience decide, huh?
Yeah, if only they had a voice.
If only, yeah.
If only they had a voice. No, but thanks so much. It was a real pleasure, super interesting, and as we always do at the end of the podcast, say goodbye to everyone, Ben.
Goodbye, everybody. I hope that in some small way, what I've talked about today helps you to get better at writing and to find out a bit more about yourself and to go to that next level as a business owner. It's always amazing the things that you discover when you go down paths that appear unrelated, and you pick up all these other little lessons along the way.
Yeah.
If you would like any help with what you're writing or feedback, I do offer those consultation services, and you can find them on the website when you look under services. And I'll be happy to work with you on that if you want to get better at perfecting the craft of writing.
Excellent. I love it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening again to the Grow Your Business podcast, and we will see you again soon, or you'll listen to us again soon. See ya.
That's it. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time here at the Grow Your Business podcast.